Pennywise the Clown has been pure nightmare fuel in It Welcome To Derry, and with the show only being a stone's throw away from concluding, I feel we could well have seen the depictions of Pennywise as he's now taken on his final form and is no longer hiding himself after being awoken by the military. So with that, I wanted to look back on, list and explain every different form Pennywise has adopted over the course of the show and why he adopted them. So let's get into it. Here is every version of Pennywise in It Welcome To Derry explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. The family and baby demon. The first form that we saw Pennywise adopting was in the first episode, and this was as he showed himself to Matty. Matty's biggest fear in life was his father, as it seemed like he wasn't the kindest to him or he had a loving home to return to. So in order to target Matty and lure him into a false sense of security, it took the form of a family and showed Matty the very thing that he wanted most in the world, a loving family. Honestly, it's such a cruel way of getting to Matty. This was then when it appeared as the baby demon for the first time, and he launched an attack on Matty which ultimately resulted in his death. The baby demon also appeared later on in the first episode inside the Capitol Theatre where Teddy, Phil and Susie were all killed. The baby demon form wasn't for a specific reason, but it was more so because it was a gruesome monster that was nightmare-inducing. The Lampshade. Another form that Pennywise took on in the first episode of the show was as the lampshade made of skin that was in Theodore's bedroom. Teddy's father told him of how his grandparents escaped Buchenwald, which was a concentration camp where prisoners were killed and had their body parts used for pieces of furniture. This is something that frightened Teddy after he was told about it by his father, hence why it used that as a way of getting to him during the night. Lily's father in the pickle jar. The second time it revealed itself, we saw it appear as the pickle jar creature, which was supposed to represent Lily's father, who was killed in a horrific way inside of the pickle jar factory that he worked at. This is quite a haunting one of it to adopt because Lily felt responsible for her father's death because she wanted him to go back and get something for her. So by showing Lily her father in a gruesome way, it isolated her and caused her to be backed into a corner, making it be the recurring monster that drove her crazy. Ronnie's mother. This was another version of it that had a personal connection. Pennywise took on the form of Ronnie's mother, somebody who she never met because she died during childbirth. Ronnie always had a sense of guilt associated with the death of her mother because, like Lily, she felt personally responsible that she was no longer around. So by showing herself this version of her mother that was in tears and then eventually took on a demonic form when it screamed in her face, it wanted the fear to season Ronnie right the way to the point where she'd be delicious. The Skeleton Man. Now, this one is taking us all the way back to 1908. In episode 3 of the show, we saw it take on General Shaw's biggest fear from when he visited the carnival in Derry. General Shaw and Rose wandered into the woods, and when he was there, the very man that scared Shaw when he was visiting the carnival appeared in a demonic form. The very skeleton man that he was petrified of appeared in the woods, but he grew in size and morphed his body to become even more frightening, ultimately opening its mouth and having more teeth with the hopes of consuming him. The Burned Man. Another personal depiction of it came when Will was out fishing with his father. When Leroy went off to the car, it first showed himself as a fish that was swimming towards Will, but then it transformed into Leroy Hanlon after his accident from when he was serving in Korea. This showed Leroy in a burned state and highlighted Will's biggest fear to him, the fear of losing his father. The entity of it loves to show the children depictions of them losing their parents, and this is because when we're at that young tender age, losing a parent is often one of a child's biggest fears. Charlotte. When it came to it wanting to torment Leroy Hanlon, whilst inside of the sewers it presented itself as Charlotte Hanlon, the wife of Leroy, but it had her appearing as if she was afraid of him. Leroy's family is the most important thing to him, especially his wife, so in showing him the person that he cared about most, but being afraid of him, it allowed it to get closer to Leroy before ultimately pouncing. The Galloo. The Galloo was one of the forms that it took when it first encountered the Native Americans inside of the area which was eventually known to be Derry. The Galloo took on the form of a giant zombified moose, and it originally didn't feast on the humans. However, once the settlers came and they started entering the forest and also killing the creatures that the Galloo would feast upon, that was then when the unwritten truce was broken and the Galloo, which appeared in its moose form, then turned on the people. The infected settlers and priests. Another manifestation that Pennywise appeared as in the show was infected settlers and priests. This was shown to the Native American people that lived inside of Derry at the time. When settlers arrived in America, they brought disease with them, so by it showing itself as the settlers that were covered in lesions and infection, that was an actuality of what the Native American people were coming up against. As well as that, it showed itself as a priest because the settlers were trying to push religion upon the Native American people, and there'd often be deadly consequences if they tried to resist. Matty. This was the form that it took on for the longest amount of time in one go, as he was essentially undercover and posing as Matty for the entirety of an episode. The entity planted itself at the top of their hideout as Matty and used the fears that it knew Matty had from when it consumed him and basically made out like he was actually him. This one was quite a sad one because it not only tricked the Derry children into believing that Matty was still alive, when in actuality he was dead, but it tricked us, the audience, into believing that there was hope for Matty too. Uncle Sam. This was one of the passing entities that it took on, and it occurred whilst the military were in the sewers and were being led there by Daniel. When two soldiers were lured off on their own, a demonic-looking Uncle Sam appeared and grabbed a hold of them. At first, it didn't feel like there was that personal connection, but the deeper you look, the more you see it could be telling of the mindset of many young male Americans at the time. Some people may have felt like they just needed to sign up to the military, and with morale being low following Vietnam, people could have signed up but not truly wanted to, hence why Uncle Sam was their greatest fear. The police officer. A very, very small moment that occurred where we caught a glimpse of it was when Hank Rogan was being put onto the bus that was taking him to Shawshank. As the chaos was emerging amongst the crowd, following them all lashing out at Hank and the father of a missing boy going to fire his weapon at them, a police officer was seen standing behind the door and he was sweating profusely and just smiling. The teeth that appeared was a clear indicator that it was Pennywise and he was simply observing the chaos that he was causing by Hank taking all of the blame. The Neighbour. Another small moment where we saw Pennywise appearing for a blink and you'll miss it section was when a man was seen to be standing in the front garden of the house next door to Ingrid, and he was watering his plants. As Lily knocked on the door, the man was staring her down right in the eye. This wasn't it wanting to get Lily, but like with the officer smiling at Charlotte, this was it just wanting to bask in the chaos and fear that was present in Derry, and catch a glimpse of the fear that Lily had inside of her. The young boy. This is now taking us back to 1908 again, and in this version of it, we saw it posing as a young boy that was simply spectating the crowd that was watching the human Pennywise the Dancing Clown. It posed as a young boy to try and tap into the empath in Bob Gray, in mentioning that he'd lost his parents, just like Bob Gray did. And with Bob Gray performing for children and having a child, it thought that it would be the very persona to get him away, which he was actually able to do. Bob Gray. In 1935, we saw it appearing as Bob Gray when he realized that Ingrid, the real Bob Gray's daughter, was in front of him. It appeared as Bob Gray because Ingrid's father leaving her, but actually being killed by it, was something that it knew was her biggest fear. It was her biggest fear to the point where it actually let her live because she was bringing it children from the hospital because it meant that she'd get time with her father. So it was a small price it had to pay, playing dress up as Bob Gray if it meant that its food would be brought directly to its feet. Pennywise the Clown. The final and most iconic version that it takes on is Pennywise the Clown. As we saw, it first took on the form in 1908 following it seeing that children were infatuated with Pennywise when the character was on stage being performed by Bob Gray. Children were flocking to see the clown, so it knew that if it took on that persona, it wouldn't have to worry about hunting. The children would just simply go to it. We've seen two forms of Pennywise in this show. We've seen the Pennywise that wants to be appealing to children and lure them away, ultimately then transforming into the large-mouthed, many-teeth version. But then we've also caught a glimpse of Pennywise that's been disturbed from his sleep and was covered in blood from the mouth all the way down to the feet. The Deadlights. The Deadlights is the purest form of it that we got a glimpse of in the penultimate episode of the season. This shows it as its ancient cosmic entity that's a mass of lights that just float around and ultimately drive humans insane if they stare directly into them. Hence what we saw with Will and Ingrid. Their eyes went milky and they floated up into the air. That is it in its truest form, and the other depictions are just manifestations that it takes on in order to either fit in or induce fear. Pennywise is obviously my favourite version of it, but when looking at which other versions I've preferred from this show, I'd have to say Ronnie's mother and the baby demon were probably the most haunting. So, there you have it, every version of Pennywise in It Welcome to Derry explained. If you want to see more videos on It Welcome to Derry, then check the playlist below, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future videos. What's been your favourite depiction of Pennywise? Share your thoughts in the comments. As always, thanks for tuning into the video, and I'll see you in the next one.